It's dawn on a small island in Japan. The year is 1612. Mist rises from the water like ghostly fingers, and the only sound is the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Two men stand facing each other, 60 paces apart. One holds a sword longer than most men are tall. The other carries nothing but a piece of carved wood. In the next few moments, one of these men will die. The other will become immortal. Welcome to the story of Miyamoto Musashi, the man who never lost. 61 duels, 61 victories, 0 defeats. Not once in his entire life did this man taste the bitterness of failure in combat. But here's what makes his story truly extraordinary. It's not just that he never lost, it's how he transformed from a wild, orphaned boy into the greatest warrior philosopher Japan has ever known. Over the next hour, you're going to discover not just the story of an undefeated swordsman, but the journey of a human being who unlocked secrets that most of us spend our entire lives searching for. Secrets about mastery, about purpose, about what it truly means to be invincible. This isn't just another tale of samurai glory. This is the story of a man who figured out how to win at life itself. A man who mastered not just the sword, but the brush. Not just combat, but philosophy. Not just technique, but the very essence of what it means to be human. Picture Japan in the late 1500s. The country is tearing itself apart. Warlords battle for control. Samurai die by the thousands. It's a world where strength means survival, and weakness means death. Into this chaos, in the year 1584, a child is born in a small village called Miyamoto. His name was Benasuke. His father, Shinman Munisai, was a skilled warrior who taught him the basics of combat before disappearing from his life. By age 7, the boy was essentially an orphan, raised by monks who tried to tame his wild spirit. But some fires cannot be contained. At 13 years old, this boy would kill his first man. The victim was Arima Kihei, a skilled swordsman from the Shinto-ryu school, experienced, trained, confident. He agreed to duel a child, probably expecting an easy victory, perhaps thinking he'd teach the boy a lesson about respect. Instead, he learned about death. That moment changed everything. Not just for the boy who would become Musashi, but for the entire history of martial arts. Because in that instant, something awakened in him. A hunger, a drive, an absolute, unshakable belief that he could defeat anyone, anywhere, anytime. But what transformed a violent teenager into a legendary master? What turned raw aggression into refined art? How did a masterless samurai become more influential than emperors? The answers lie in a journey that would take him across the length and breadth of Japan. A journey through blood and philosophy, through victory and enlightenment, through the deepest valleys of human experience and the highest peaks of spiritual understanding. You see, Musashi didn't just learn how to fight. He learned how to think. He didn't just master technique, he mastered himself. And in doing so, he discovered principles that apply far beyond the battlefield. Principles about strategy, about timing, about reading people and situations. Principles that are just as relevant in a boardroom today as they were on a dueling ground 400 years ago. Tonight, as you settle in for this journey, you're going to walk alongside the most fascinating figure in Japanese history. You'll witness his first kill and his last breath. You'll see him destroy entire sword schools and create timeless art. You'll watch him evolve from a brutal killer into a gentle sage who wrote poetry about cherry blossoms. You'll discover why he never lost a single fight, but more importantly, you'll understand what he won that was far more valuable than any victory. You'll learn about the 5 elements that governed his philosophy, the 21 principles he lived by, and the simple wooden sword that made him immortal. This is the complete story of Miyamoto Musashi. Every triumph, every transformation, every lesson that turned a wild boy into the most revered warrior philosopher in human history. So settle back, close your eyes if you wish, and let me take you on a journey to 16th century Japan. To a time when honor was everything, when skill meant survival, and when one man's quest for perfection changed the world forever. Our story begins in the year 1584, in a small village where a legend was about to be born, the forging of a legend. The village of Miyamoto sits quietly in the mountains of Mimasaka province, where morning mist clings to ancient pine trees like memories refusing to fade. It's here, on March 23, 1584, that our story truly begins. The child born that day was named Benasuke, a name that would soon be forgotten, replaced by something far more powerful. But every legend begins with a single breath, and this breath was drawn in a world already soaked in blood. Japan in 1584 was not the peaceful nation we know today. It was a country at war with itself, the Sengoku period, the age of warring states, where powerful daimyo fought endless battles for control, and samurai lived and died by the sword. Into this chaos, Benasuke was born to a man named Shinmin Munisai. Munisai was no ordinary father. He was a master of the jut, a hooked weapon used to catch and break swords. He understood combat in ways that most men never would. But understanding combat and understanding fatherhood, these are very different things. Picture a small boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, watching his father practice in the early morning light. The precise movements, the deadly focus, the way Munisai could disarm a man without killing him, or kill without seeming to move at all. For young Benasuke, these weren't just techniques, they were poetry, written in steel and flesh. But poetry has a way of ending abruptly. When Benasuke was 7 years old, his father vanished from his life. Some say Munisai died. Others believe he simply walked away, perhaps understanding that his son needed to find his own path. Whatever the truth, the boy found himself essentially orphaned, taken in by Buddhist monks at a local temple. Imagine being 7 years old and losing the one person who understood your nature. The monks tried their best. They taught him to read and write. They showed him meditation and philosophy. They attempted to channel his obvious intelligence into peaceful pursuits. But some spirits cannot be tamed by prayer and contemplation. Benasuke was difficult, rebellious. He had inherited not just his father's martial instincts, but something else to define: a restlessness, a hunger, an absolute refusal to accept that anyone was better than him at anything. The other children learned quickly to avoid him. The monks grew frustrated with his constant challenges to authority. But there was one thing that captured his attention completely: the way of the sword. While other boys his age played games or studied scripture, Benasuke would disappear for hours, practicing with wooden sticks, imagining battles, developing an understanding of combat that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. It was as if his father's knowledge lived in his blood, waiting to be awakened. By the time he reached 13, his reputation had spread beyond the temple walls. Local samurai had heard of this strange boy who moved like a warrior despite having no formal training. Some were curious, others were skeptical. One man decided to test him. His name was Arima Kihei, and he was a respected swordsman of the Shinto-ryu school, experienced in real combat, confident in his abilities. When he heard about this arrogant child who claimed to understand the sword, he saw an opportunity to teach a lesson about humility. The duel was arranged for dawn, as was traditional. Picture the scene: morning mist rising from the ground, the first light of day filtering through the trees. Two figures facing each other across a small clearing. One, a grown man with years of training and multiple victories to his name. The other, a 13-year-old boy holding a wooden sword. Arima Kihei probably expected this to be over quickly. A few swift moves to disarm the boy, perhaps a light tap to remind him of his place in the world. A lesson in respect that would send him back to his temple properly humbled. He was wrong. What happened next would be debated for centuries. Some say the boy moved with impossible speed. Others claim he used psychological warfare, unsettling his opponent with unexpected tactics. But the result was undeniable. Arima Kihei died that morning, not from a lucky strike or a fortunate accident, but from a calculated, precise attack that demonstrated a level of skill that should have been impossible in someone so young. In that moment, Benosuke learned something that would shape the rest of his life. He learned that he could kill. More than that, he learned that he was good at it, perhaps better than anyone. But what transforms a moment of violence into the beginning of a legend? What turns a single victory into the foundation of greatness? The answer lies not in the killing itself, but in what the boy chose to do with that knowledge. Most 13-year-olds who had just taken a life might have been traumatized, might have run home to hide, might have spent years trying to forget what they had done. But Benosuke felt something else entirely. He felt awakened. This wasn't bloodlust or cruelty. This was recognition that he had found his calling, his purpose, his way of engaging with the world. From that moment forward, he knew that his path would be written in steel and strategy. The years that followed were a blur of training and preparation. The boy threw himself into the study of combat with an intensity that amazed even the monks who had tried to tame him. He studied not just technique, but psychology, not just strength, but timing, not just how to win, but why people lose. By 16 years old and already developing a reputation, he faced a choice that would define his entire future. The Battle of Sekigahara was approaching, the decisive conflict that would determine who would rule Japan for the next 2.5 centuries. This wasn't just another battle. This was the moment when the chaotic warring states period would finally end, when Tokugawa Ieyasu would establish the shogunate that would bring peace to Japan. But young Benosuke, now calling himself Miyamoto Musashi, didn't know any of that. All he knew was that there was going to be a massive battle, and he wanted to be part of it. Not for politics or loyalty to any particular lord, but for the simple reason that battle was where he belonged, where he could test himself against the finest warriors in the land. He chose to fight for the Western Army, led by Ishida Mitsunari. It seemed like a reasonable choice at the time. Mitsunari had powerful allies and a strong position. Victory seemed likely, but history had other plans. October 15th, 1600. The morning mist cleared to reveal two massive armies facing each other across the plain of Sekigahara. Tens of thousands of samurai, the finest warriors in Japan, ready to decide the future of their nation in a single day of blood and steel. The battle began at 8 in the morning. By noon, it was over. The Western army had been completely destroyed, not through superior fighting, but through betrayal and political maneuvering that the young Musashi couldn't have anticipated. Most of the survivors of that defeat faced death or disgrace. Their lords were executed or stripped of their lands. Their samurai became ronin, masterless warriors, with no place in the new order that Tokugawa was creating. But for Musashi, this devastating defeat became the greatest gift of his life. You see, losing at Sekigahara freed him from everything that might have held him back. He had no lord to serve, no obligations to fulfill, no traditional path to follow. He was completely, utterly alone in the world. And for a man like Musashi, that wasn't a curse, it was liberation. Standing in the aftermath of that great defeat, surrounded by the bodies of thousands of warriors, the 16-year-old Musashi made a decision that would echo through history. He would not seek another master. He would not join another army. He would not follow anyone else's path. Instead, he would create his own way. He would travel the length and breadth of Japan, seeking out the finest swordsmen, the most skilled masters, the deadliest fighters the country had to offer. And he would defeat them all. This wasn't arrogance, though it might have seemed like it to those who knew him. This was something deeper, a recognition that true mastery could only come through constant testing, constant challenge, constant growth. He understood, even at 16, that comfort was the enemy of excellence. And so, as the smoke cleared from the battlefield at Sekigahara, as the new Tokugawa order began to take shape, as Japan prepared to enter an era of unprecedented peace, one young warrior set out on a journey that would be anything but peaceful. He walked away from that battlefield, not as a defeated soldier, but as something far more dangerous. He walked away as a man with nothing to lose and everything to prove. A man who had tasted victory and defeat, who understood both the power of the sword and the fragility of life. And thus began the most extraordinary journey in the history of Japan. A journey that would take him from village to village, dojo to dojo, master to master. A journey that would transform him from Benasoke, the orphan, into Miyamoto, Musashi, the legend. A journey written in blood, guided by philosophy, and destined to change the very meaning of what it meant to be a warrior. The years of iron and blood. The road stretches endlessly before him, winding through mountains shrouded in morning mist. It's 1601, and the young warrior who once called himself Benosuke has shed that name like a snake sheds its skin. Now he is Miyamoto Musashi, and he walks alone. This is the beginning of what the Japanese call Mushashugo, the warrior's pilgrimage, a sacred journey undertaken by those who seek not just skill, but understanding, not just technique, but truth. Picture him as he was then, 17 years old, carrying 2 swords and a heart full of questions that could only be answered through steel. He had no money, no retainers, no comfortable castle to return to, just an unshakable belief that somewhere out there, in the dojos and training halls of Japan, lay the secrets he needed to unlock. But this wasn't wandering. This was hunting. Musashi moved through Japan like a predator, seeking worthy prey, following rumors of skilled masters, tracking down legendary fighters, appearing at sword schools with a simple, terrifying request: I challenge your best. The early duels were almost too easy. Village champions who had never faced anyone beyond their local rivals. regional masters whose reputations were built on technique rather than actual combat experience. One by one, they fell to this strange young ronin who fought with an intensity that seemed to come from another world. But with each victory, Musashi learned something crucial. He learned that reputation meant nothing, that traditional forms, no matter how beautiful, were useless if they couldn't adapt to chaos, that most swordsmen were fighting the duel they expected, not the duel they were actually in. By 1604, his reputation had reached the ancient capital of Kyoto, where the most prestigious sword schools in Japan made their home. And there, in the shadow of temples that had stood for 1,000 years, he would face his greatest challenge, the Yoshioka school. For over a century, the Yoshioka family had been the premier sword instructors in Japan. They had taught emperors and shoguns. Their techniques were considered the pinnacle of martial artistry. Their reputation was unassailable until Musashi arrived. Imagine the shock when this unknown ronin, barely 20 years old, appeared at their gates, requesting a duel with the head of the school. The students probably laughed. The instructors likely dismissed him as another deluded wanderer. But Yoshioka Seiyuro, the master himself, saw something in those dark eyes that made him accept the duel was set for dawn at Rendage Temple, outside the city. Word spread quickly through Kyoto's martial community. This wasn't just another practice match. This was a test of everything the Yoshioka school represented. They faced each other as the first light touched the temple grounds. Seiyuro, elegant and precise, carrying the weight of generations of tradition. Musashi, rough and unpredictable, carrying nothing but his own burning need to understand the limits of human skill. The fight lasted less than a minute. Seijuro's technique was flawless. His form was perfect. His movements were exactly as they had been taught for generations, and none of it mattered. Musashi didn't fight the way Seiyuro expected. He didn't follow the rules that governed traditional dueling. He fought to win, and winning meant that Seiyuro went home with a broken arm and a shattered reputation. But defeating the master wasn't enough. The Yoshioka school still stood. Their students still believed in their superiority. And Musashi understood something that would define his entire approach to conflict. Half measures create more problems than they solve. A year later, he returned. This time, his opponent was Yoshioka Denshichiro, Seijuro's younger brother, and the new head of the school. Denshichiro was everything his brother was, but younger, stronger, and burning with the need for revenge. The second duel was even more decisive than the first. Denshichiro came at Musashi with everything he had: years of training, generations of technique, and the fury of a man defending his family's honor. But Musashi had spent that year learning, growing, understand just how to fight, but how to think during a fight. He killed Denshichiro with a single stroke. Now, the Yoshioka school faced a crisis that went beyond martial arts. This wasn't just about technique anymore. This was about survival. About whether one of Japan's most prestigious institutions would be destroyed by a single masterless samurai. They made a decision that would haunt Japanese martial arts for centuries. If they couldn't defeat Musashi in single combat, they would destroy him through numbers. They challenged him to one final duel, but this time it wouldn't be honorable single combat. This time they planned to kill him. The meeting was arranged at Ichijoji Temple, north of Kyoto. The Yoshioka school told Musashi he would face young Yoshioka Matashichiro, barely more than a boy and the last hope of the family line. What they didn't tell him was that dozens of armed men would be waiting in the shadows. But Musashi had learned to read people as well as he read sword technique. Something about the arrangement felt wrong. The location was too isolated. The Yoshioka representatives were too eager. The whole situation had the smell of a trap. So he did something that no honorable samurai would ever consider. He arrived early. While the Yoshioka forces were still positioning themselves, while they were still preparing their ambush, Musashi emerged from the darkness like a demon from hell. He struck down young Matashichiro before the boy could even draw his sword. Then he turned on the hidden attackers. What followed wasn't a duel, it was a massacre. When the sun rose that morning, the Yoshioka school effectively ceased to exist. Not just defeated, but destroyed, scattered, broken so completely that it would never recover its former prestige. Some called Musashi's tactics dishonorable. They said he had violated the code of Bushido, that he had won through treachery rather than skill. But Musashi understood something that his critics didn't honor, is a luxury that only the living can afford. These victories taught him lessons that went far beyond swordsmanship. He learned that reputation could be a weakness, making people predictable. He learned that tradition could be a trap, preventing adaptation to new realities. Most importantly, he learned that true strength came not from following rules, but from understanding when rules needed to be broken. But perhaps the most significant development during these years wasn't any single victory. It was the gradual evolution of his fighting style into something completely unique. Something that would revolutionize martial arts forever. Nitenryu, the way of two swords. Most samurai carried two swords, the long katana and the shorter wakizashi. But they were trained to use them separately. The wakizashi serving mainly as a backup weapon or for close quarters combat. Musashi began to see possibilities that others missed. What if both swords could be used simultaneously? What if the long sword could attack while the short sword defended? What if a fighter could create patterns of offense and defense that no single sword opponent could predict or counter? It sounds simple now, but at the time, it was revolutionary. It required not just ambidextrous skill, but a completely different way of thinking about combat. Instead of linear attack and defense, Musashi was creating a flowing, circular system where every movement served multiple purposes. He called it two swords, one heart. The idea that both weapons were extensions of a single will, a single intention, not two separate tools, but two aspects of one unified approach to conflict. As word of his victories spread, as his reputation grew from local curiosity to national phenomenon, Musashi began to attract attention from quarters he hadn't expected. Not just other swordsmen seeking to test themselves against him, but artists, philosophers, and strategists who recognized that what he was developing went far beyond mere fighting technique. He was creating a new way of understanding conflict itself. During the quiet moments between duels, as he walked the endless roads of Japan, Musashi began to see connections that others missed. The way water flowed around obstacles, the way wind bent trees without breaking them, the way a master painter could suggest an entire landscape with just a few strokes of the brush. All of these things, he realized, were aspects of the same fundamental principle, the principle of adaptation, of using an opponent's strength against them, of finding the path of least resistance that led to maximum effect. By 1610, Musashi had fought dozens of duels and won them all. He had destroyed the most prestigious sword school in Japan. He had developed a fighting system that seemed almost supernatural to those who witnessed it. But all of this was just preparation. Because somewhere in Japan there was another man following a similar path. Another warrior who had never tasted defeat. Another master who believed himself to be the finest swordsman alive. His name was Sasaki Kujiro, and he was known throughout the land as the demon of the western provinces. Where Musashi was rough and adaptable, Kujiro was elegant and precise. Where Musashi broke rules, Kujiro perfected them. Where Musashi used two swords, Kujiro had mastered a single blade longer than most men were tall. Their paths had been converging for years, like two storms moving toward the same point on the map. Every victory brought them closer to each other. Every defeated opponent whispered the same question. But could you defeat Kujiro? Kujiro's signature technique was called Subam Geishi, the swallow cut. A strike so fast, so precise, that it was said to be able to cut a swallow in flight. No one who had faced it had lived to describe it in detail. By 1611, the entire martial arts community of Japan was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable meeting between these two titans. It wasn't a question of if they would fight, but when, and where, and which one would walk away. Musashi knew this day was coming. In the quiet moments of his journey, he could feel it approaching like a distant storm. All of his victories, all of his innovations, all of his understanding, everything had been leading to this single moment. But there was something about Kujiro that made this different from every other challenge Musashi had faced. This wasn't just another skilled swordsman. This wasn't just another test of technique. This was a man who might actually be better than him. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he rarely allowed himself to visit, Musashi wondered, what happens to a man who has never lost when he finally meets someone he cannot defeat? The answer to that question lay waiting on a small island in the Kanman Straits, where the morning mist would soon witness the most legendary duel in the history of Japan. GANRYU Island, the day that stopped Japan. April 13th, 1612. Dawn is still hours away, but across Japan, people are already awake, whispering the same question. Today is the day. Who will survive? For months, the entire martial arts world has been holding its breath. Two names spoken in the same sentence, like thunder following lightning. Miyamoto, Musashi, and Sasaki, Kujiro, the unstoppable force and the immovable object. The question that has consumed every dojo, every tea house, every gathering of warriors. What happens when perfection meets perfection? But to understand this moment, you need to understand the man who stands opposite Musashi in this deadly equation. Sasaki Kujiro, known throughout Western Japan as the demon of the Western provinces, where Musashi is rough innovation. Kujiro is refined tradition. Where Musashi breaks rules, Kujiro has perfected them to an art form. Picture him, tall, elegant, moving with the fluid grace of a dancer. His sword, a nodachi called drying pole, is longer than most men are tall. Nearly 4 feet of perfectly forged steel that he wields with impossible precision. While other swordsmen struggle with the weight and awkwardness of such a weapon, Kujiro makes it sing through the air like a living thing. His signature move, the Subam Geishi, the swallow cut, is whispered about in tones of religious awe. They say he developed it by watching swallows dive and turn in flight, their movements so quick they seemed to defy the laws of physics. His sword work mirrors that impossible agility. A strike that seems to come from 3 directions at once, cutting down, up, and across in a single fluid motion. No one who has faced the swallow cut has lived to describe it in detail. Where Musashi has spent years wandering the roads, sleeping under stars, fighting anyone who would face him, Kojiro has been the pampered sword instructor to the powerful Hosokawa clan. Where Musashi has learned through brutal trial and error, Kojiro has refined his technique in the safety of private dojos, with carefully selected opponents. But here's what makes this confrontation so fascinating. Both men believe, with absolute certainty, that they are the finest swordsmen alive. Both have never lost. Both have built their entire identity around their invincibility. And in a few hours, one of them will discover that he was wrong. The challenge had been arranged through intermediaries, as was proper for such a momentous occasion. The location chosen was a small island in the Kanman Straits, known locally as Funishima, but which would forever after be called GANRYU Island, named for Kojiro's fighting style. It's a desolate place, rocky, windswept, surrounded by treacherous currents that have claimed countless ships over the centuries. The perfect stage for a drama that would echo through history. Isolated enough that the authorities couldn't interfere, but accessible enough that word of the outcome would spread quickly across Japan. As dawn approaches on April 13th, Kojiro is already there, waiting. He has arrived precisely on time, as honor demands. His sword is perfectly maintained, his mind focused, his body prepared. He stands like a statue carved from marble, watching the horizon for the boat that will bring his opponent. But the sun rises, and Musashi does not come. An hour passes. Then too, Kojiro begins to pace, his perfect composure starting to crack. Is Musashi afraid? Has he realized that this time he faces an opponent he cannot defeat? The possibility is almost too delicious to contemplate. But this delay isn't fear, it's strategy. Musashi understands something that Kojiro, for all his technical perfection, has never learned. The duel begins long before the swords are drawn. It begins in the mind, in the heart, in the subtle psychological warfare that determines who will be calm and who will be desperate when steel finally meets steel. By arriving late, Musashi is doing several things at once. He's forcing Kojiro to wait, to worry, to imagine all the possible reasons for the delay. He's disrupting his opponent's carefully planned mental preparation. Most importantly, he's demonstrating that he doesn't feel bound by the same rules that govern other men. Finally, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, a small boat appears on the horizon. But even now, Musashi continues his psychological assault. Instead of using a proper sword, he carries only a wooden bakken, carved, legend says, from an oar during the boat ride to the island. Imagine Kojiro's reaction. He has brought his finest blade, honed to perfection, a weapon that represents generations of sword-making artistry. And his opponent arrives, carrying a piece of carved wood, as if this legendary duel is nothing more than a practice session. But Musashi's choice of weapon is anything but casual. The wooden sword is longer than Kojiro's steel blade, just barely, but enough to give him a crucial advantage in reach. More importantly, it's a psychological statement. I'm so confident in my superiority that I don't even need a real sword to defeat you. They face each other across the rocky ground of the island. Kojiro, elegant and deadly, his long steel blade catching the morning light. Musashi, rough and unpredictable, holding nothing but carved wood and absolute confidence. For a moment, they simply study each other, two masters, each reading the other's stance, breathing, micro-expressions, looking for any hint of weakness, any tell that might provide an advantage. The air between them seems to vibrate with potential violence. Kojiro moves first, drawing his impossibly long sword in a motion so fluid it seems like water flowing uphill. The blade sings as it cuts through the air, and for a moment the morning light fractures along its edge like broken glass, and then they explode into motion. Kojiro's attack is everything his reputation promised. The swallow cut unfolds like a deadly flower, his blade seeming to strike from multiple angles simultaneously. It's a technique that has never failed, a movement so perfect it borders on the supernatural. But Musashi isn't there. In the split second that Kojiro commits to his legendary technique, Musashi does something that no one expects. He doesn't try to block or parry. He doesn't attempt to match technique with technique. Instead, he steps forward inside the arc of Kojiro's swing and brings his wooden sword down in a simple, brutal overhead strike. The sound of wood striking skull echoes across the water like a gunshot. Kojiro staggers, his perfect technique disrupted, his legendary blade suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. Blood streams down his face from where the wooden sword has cracked his skull. For the first time in his life, he has been struck by an opponent. He tries to recover, tries to bring his sword up for another attack, but the damage is too severe. His vision blurs, his balance fails. The man who has never known defeat collapses to the rocky ground of the island, his blood mixing with the morning mist. Musashi stands over his fallen opponent, the wooden sword still in his hands, and for a moment the entire world seems to hold its breath. The greatest duel in Japanese history is over. The question that has consumed the martial arts world has been answered, but as Kojiro's life ebbs away on that desolate island, something profound happens in Musashi's mind, something that will change not just his approach to combat, but his entire understanding of what it means to be a warrior. He looks down at the man he has just killed, and he sees not an enemy, but a mirror. Kojiro was everything Musashi might have become if he had chosen the path of refinement over innovation, tradition over adaptation. In defeating him, Musashi hasn't just won a duel. He has defeated a part of himself through victory. Each defeated opponent has been another step towards some ultimate goal, some perfect understanding of combat. But standing over Kojiro's body, he realizes that victory alone is not enough, that defeating others is meaningless if you haven't first defeated yourself. The wooden sword in his hands suddenly feels impossibly heavy, not because of its physical weight, but because of what it represents. This crude piece of carved wood has just defeated the finest steel blade in Japan. Not through superior craftsmanship or traditional technique, but through understanding, through seeing the situation clearly and responding appropriately. In that moment, Musashi understands something that will guide the rest of his life. The sword is not the source of power, the mind is. Technique is not the goal, understanding is. Victory is not the end, it's barely the beginning. He walks back to his boat without ceremony, without celebration, without even looking back at the body of his fallen opponent. The boatman who brought him to the island asks no questions. The silence speaks louder than any words could. As they row away from GANRYU Island, Musashi stares at the wooden sword that has just made him the most famous warrior in Japan. But fame, he realizes, is just another trap. Another way of limiting yourself to other people's expectations. The man who steps off that boat is not the same person who stepped onto it hours earlier. Yes, he has won the greatest duel of his generation. Yes, he has proven himself the finest swordsman alive. But more importantly, he has learned that being the finest swordsman alive is not actually the point. The point is understanding. The point is growth. The point is becoming something more than just a man who is good at killing other men. As news of the duel spreads across Japan, as his legend grows beyond anything he could have imagined, Musashi begins to see his path more clearly. He has spent 12 years proving that he can defeat anyone in single combat. Now he needs to discover what lies beyond combat. The techniques he has developed, the insights he has gained, the understanding he has achieved. All of this is just the foundation for something larger, something that will transform him from a master swordsman into something far more rare and valuable. Because true mastery, he is beginning to understand, is not about perfecting one thing. It's about understanding how all things connect, how the principles that govern combat also govern art, philosophy, strategy, and life itself. The greatest duel in Japanese history is over. But for Miyamoto Musashi, the real journey is just beginning. On a small island in the Kanman Straits, surrounded by the eternal sound of waves against stone, a legend was born. But legends, Musashi now understands, are just the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom requires a very different kind of courage than victory ever did. From warrior to sage. The boat carrying Musashi away from GANRYU Island cuts through water that reflects the morning sky like polished steel. But the man sitting in that boat is no longer the same person who arrived at the island hours earlier. Something fundamental has shifted. The greatest swordsman in Japan has just discovered that being the greatest swordsman in Japan is not enough. The years that follow, 1612 to 1640, represent one of the most remarkable transformations in human history. Not the transformation of a weak man into a strong one, or an ignorant man into a wise one, but something far more rare, the transformation of a master into something beyond mastery. Picture Musashi in the months after GANRYU Island. He could have capitalized on his fame, established a sword school, attracted wealthy students, lived comfortably on his reputation. Instead, he does something that puzzles everyone who knows him. He begins to withdraw from the world of dueling. Not from fear, never from fear, but from a growing understanding that the path he has been following, the path of constant combat and endless victory, has taught him everything it can teach. To continue growing, he needs to explore territories that cannot be conquered with a sword. It begins quietly, almost accidentally. During a period of rest at a mountain temple, Musashi picks up a brush and begins to paint. Not because anyone has taught him, not because he has any formal training, but because something inside him needs expression that cannot be found in the language of steel and violence. His first attempts are crude, clumsy. The brush feels foreign in hands that have known only the grip of a sword. But there's something there, a sensitivity, an understanding of line and space that surprises even him. The same eye that can read an opponent's intentions in the micro-movements of their stance can also see the essential nature of a bird perched on a branch. Slowly, patiently, with the same dedication he once brought to perfecting his sword technique. Musashi begins to master the art of sumi-e ink painting. But his approach is unlike any traditional artist. Where others paint what they think they should see, Musashi paints what is actually there. Where others follow established forms, he captures the living essence of his subject. His paintings are revolutionary in their simplicity. A few bold strokes that somehow contain an entire world. A bird that seems ready to take flight from the paper. Bamboo that bends with wind you cannot see but somehow feel. Each painting is like his swordsmanship. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes, just pure intention made visible. But this isn't just a hobby or a way to pass time between battles. Musashi begins to understand that painting and swordsmanship are expressions of the same fundamental principles. Both require perfect timing. Both demand the ability to see clearly without being clouded by expectation. Both achieve their greatest power through economy of motion. When he paints a sparrow, he must understand not just how it looks, but how it moves, how it thinks, how it relates to its environment. When he faces an opponent, he must understand not just their technique, but their psychology, their fears, their unconscious habits. The skills are identical, only the medium changes. As the years pass, Musashi's reputation as an artist begins to rival his fame as a warrior. But more importantly, his understanding of the principles that govern both arts begins to crystallize into something larger, a philosophy, a way of seeing the world that transcends any single discipline. He begins to see patterns everywhere. The way water flows around obstacles mirrors the way a skilled fighter moves around an opponent's attack. The way a master calligrapher's brush dances across paper reflects the same rhythm that governs perfect swordwork. The way light and shadow create depth in a painting teaches lessons about timing and positioning that apply to any form of conflict. By 1640, Musashi has reached his mid-50s. His hair is gray, his face lined by decades of sun and wind and contemplation. He has not fought a duel in years, not because he has lost his skill, but because he has transcended the need to prove his skill. The questions that drive him now are deeper, more complex, more important than any that can be answered with a sword. And so he begins to write. The work that emerges over the next 5 years will become one of the most influential books ever written. Not just about martial arts, but about strategy, psychology, and the fundamental nature of conflict itself. He calls it Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of 5 Rings. But this isn't just another manual of sword technique. This is Musashi's attempt to capture everything he has learned about the nature of winning and losing, about reading situations and people, about adapting to circumstances and finding advantage where others see only obstacles. He divides his wisdom into 5 books, each named for one of the classical elements. Earth, the foundation of all strategy. Water, the importance of adaptability and flow. Fire, the intensity and psychology of actual conflict. Wind, understanding and critiquing other approaches. And finally, void, the transcendent state where technique becomes unnecessary because understanding is complete. Each section is dense with insights that apply far beyond the battlefield. Know your enemy and know yourself, he writes, echoing ancient wisdom but adding layers of practical detail that only someone who has lived these principles could provide. Perceive that which cannot be seen with the eye, he advises, describing the intuitive awareness that separates masters from mere technicians. But perhaps most remarkably, Musashi understands that the principles he has discovered apply to any form of human endeavor. Business negotiations, artistic creation, personal relationships, political maneuvering. The same insights that made him invincible in single combat can make anyone more effective in whatever challenges they face. As he nears the end of his life, as his body begins to fail but his mind remains sharp as ever, Musashi undertakes one final project, something more personal, more distilled than even the 5 rings, a document that will capture not just his strategic insights, but his philosophy of how to live. He calls it Dokad, the way of walking alone. 21 precepts that represent the essence of everything he has learned about existence itself. Accept everything just the way it is, he writes. Not passive resignation, but the warrior's understanding that you cannot change what has already happened. You can only respond to it effectively. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. The discipline that made him unbeatable in combat extended to every aspect of his life. Pleasure that serves no purpose weakens the spirit. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Ego is the enemy of clear perception. The moment you become more interested in your own importance than in understanding reality, you have begun to lose. Do not regret what you have done. Every action, every choice, every victory and defeat has led to this moment of understanding. Regret is just another form of attachment to the past. Never be jealous. Jealousy clouds judgment and wastes energy that could be used for improvement. Do not fear death, perhaps the most important lesson of all. Fear of death makes you cling to life in ways that prevent you from truly living. These aren't just philosophical abstractions. They are the practical wisdom of a man who has spent 60 years testing himself against the ultimate challenges life can offer. A man who has discovered that true strength comes not from defeating others, but from understanding yourself so completely that defeat becomes impossible. In 1645, feeling his death approaching, Musashi retreats to a cave called Rigando, outside the city of Kumamoto. Here, in the silence and solitude that have always been his truest companions, he prepares for his final transformation. He spends his last days not in regret or fear, but in completion, finishing his writings, saying farewell to his few close disciples, preparing his mind for the one journey that even the greatest warrior must take alone. On June 13th, 1645, as the morning light filters into the cave where he has spent his final weeks, Miyamoto Musashi closes his eyes for the last time. He dies as he lived, alone, undefeated, and completely at peace with the choices he has made. But death, for a man like Musashi, is not an ending. It's a transformation. The body that carried him through 61 years of life and 61 victories returns to the earth. But the understanding he achieved, the wisdom he captured in his writings, the example he set of what human potential can achieve, these things become immortal. In that cave outside Kumamoto, something remarkable happens. The greatest warrior in Japanese history completes his final victory, not over an external enemy, but over the fear and limitation that constrain most human lives. He dies not as a man who happened to be good at fighting, but as someone who used fighting as a path to understanding the deepest truths about existence itself. And in dying, he ensures that his real victory, the victory of wisdom over ignorance, of understanding over confusion, of mastery over mediocrity, will echo through the centuries. inspiring countless others to seek their own path to transcendence. The warrior is gone, but the sage has just begun his greatest work, the eternal legacy. June 13th, 1645, in a cave carved from living rock, overlooking the ancient city of Kumamoto, the greatest warrior in Japanese history draws his final breath. There are no crowds to witness this moment, no ceremonies, no fanfare, just the eternal silence of stone and the gentle sound of wind through pine trees. Miyamoto Musashi dies as he lived, alone, uncompromising, and completely at peace with the path he has chosen. His body, worn by 61 years of constant testing, finally surrenders to the one opponent that no technique can defeat. But in surrendering, he achieves his greatest victory, because death, for a man like Musashi, is not an ending. It's a transformation, a final shedding of everything temporary to reveal what is truly eternal. His swords rust, his paintings fade, his physical form returns to the earth from which it came. But something else, something infinitely more valuable, begins its journey through time. In the years following his death, copies of his writings begin to circulate throughout Japan. Go-rin, no-sho, and dakode pass from hand to hand, from master to student, from generation to generation. But these aren't just historical curiosities or martial arts manuals. They are living documents that continue to teach, to challenge, to transform everyone who encounters them. A merchant in Edo reads about adapting like water and revolutionizes his approach to negotiation. A young samurai discovers the principle of knowing the enemy and knowing yourself and becomes a legendary strategist. An artist learns about economy of motion and creates masterpieces with just a few perfect brushstrokes. Because what Musashi discovered in his journey from violent orphan to enlightened sage wasn't just about swordsmanship. It was about the fundamental principles that govern all human excellence. The same insights that made him unbeatable in combat make others unbeatable in whatever arena they choose to enter. Centuries pass. Japan transforms from a feudal society to a modern nation. The age of the samurai ends. But Musashi's influence only grows stronger. His books are translated into dozens of languages. His principles are studied in business schools and military academies around the world. In corporate boardrooms in New York and Tokyo, executives quote his wisdom about timing and positioning. Strike when the iron is hot, they say, echoing his teachings about recognizing the perfect moment for action. Athletes study his insights about mental preparation and the psychology of competition. Artists find inspiration in his approach to capturing essence rather than mere appearance. But perhaps most remarkably, people from every walk of life discover in Musashi's story something they desperately need: proof that human potential has no limits, that mastery is possible, that an ordinary person, through dedication and understanding, can achieve the extraordinary. His 21 precepts from the dakode speak to modern readers with startling relevance. Accept everything just the way it is becomes a foundation for resilience in an uncertain world. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world offers an antidote to the narcissism that plagues our age. Do not fear death reminds us that the fear of failure often prevents us from truly living. 400 years after his death, Musashi's insights remain as fresh and powerful as the day he wrote them. Because he wasn't just describing sword techniques or martial arts philosophy. He was mapping the territory of human excellence itself. the same territory that every person who seeks mastery must eventually explore. And what is the ultimate lesson of Miyamoto Musashi's extraordinary life? It's not that he never lost a duel, though that remains unprecedented. It's not that he created revolutionary fighting techniques, though GANRYU continues to be studied today. It's not even that he became a master artist and philosopher, though his paintings and writings are treasured as national treasures. The ultimate lesson is that he never stopped growing, never stopped questioning, never stopped pushing beyond what he thought was possible. At 13, he was a killer. At 28, he was the greatest swordsman alive. At 61, he was something far more rare and valuable, a complete human being. He showed us that mastery isn't a destination, it's a way of traveling. That excellence isn't about being better than others, it's about being better than you were yesterday. That true strength comes not from defeating enemies, but from understanding yourself so completely that defeat becomes impossible. In that cave outside Kumamoto, as his physical form prepared to return to dust, Musashi achieved something that no sword could ever accomplish. He became immortal, not in body, but in influence, not in flesh, but in the ideas and principles that continue to guide and inspire people across cultures and centuries. Every time someone chooses growth over comfort, they honor his memory. Every time someone adapts to circumstances rather than being broken by them, they walk his path. Every time someone pursues mastery with the dedication of a true warrior, they carry forward his legacy. And so, in dojos around the world, students still bow before beginning their practice, acknowledging the debt they owe to the masterless samurai who showed them what was possible. In boardrooms and studios, in laboratories and libraries, people still apply the principles he discovered through a lifetime of relentless self-improvement. The boy named Benisuke died long ago. The young warrior who called himself Musashi has been dust for centuries. But the understanding they achieved, the wisdom they captured, the example they set, these things are as alive today as they were 400 years ago. And perhaps that's the greatest victory of all. To live in such a way that death becomes irrelevant. To achieve something so valuable that it transcends the limitations of any single lifetime. To become not just a master of your chosen art, but a teacher for all humanity. And thus, the invincible became immortal.